Welcome to Veterans Creed, the channel where bravery, sacrifice, and honor come alive. Here, we share the untold stories of heroes, the lessons of courage, and the spirit that defines true veterans. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we honor the legends and uncover the stories that... She moved across the deck with a quiet precision, her hands gliding over the cold metal of the Tomahawk missiles as if she were conducting a silent ritual. The roar of the engines, the clanging of chains, and the constant chatter of the crew created a chaotic symphony, yet she felt invisible within it. No one noticed the way her shoulders ached from lifting, or how her fingers trembled slightly as she tightened the bolts. She wasn't seeking attention. That had never been her way. She just did her job, and she did it perfectly. Her uniform was nothing special, standard issue Navy fatigue, slightly worn from months at sea. She blended in easily with the rest of the deck crew, yet her posture carried the subtle weight of someone who had endured far more than anyone around her could imagine. Every movement she made was precise, practiced, honed through years of training and discipline. There was a rhythm to her actions, a quiet grace in the midst of chaos, and yet, beneath it, a storm of memories lingered. The sun was beginning its slow climb above the horizon, painting the deck in harsh oranges and golds. Mist from the ocean clung to the surfaces of the carrier, making the metal glint as if it were alive. She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow and adjusted her gloves, careful not to disrupt the delicate alignment of the missile. Every step mattered. A single mistake here could mean disaster. She had seen enough of disasters to know the stakes, even if the rest of the crew remained blissfully unaware. Her mind wandered to the missions she had survived, the battles where each decision had been a matter of life and death. Those were the moments that no one ever saw, moments far removed from the routine drills and maintenance duties she performed now. She had carried the weight of those experiences silently, her bravery hidden beneath the ordinary appearance of a deck crew member. To anyone passing by, she was just another worker, but each scar on her body, each tension in her muscles, told a story of survival that words could never fully convey. A fellow crew member stumbled past, cursing under his breath as he tried to maneuver a crate of supplies through the narrow space between missiles. She barely noticed him. Her focus was absolute, almost meditative, as if the world around her had receded to a blur, leaving only her hands, the missile, and the precise movements required to secure it safely. She had learned early on that in her line of work, distractions were dangerous. And yet, this morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was about to disrupt the routine, a ripple of anticipation that made her heart beat just a little faster. The deck beneath her feet shook as a jet roared past, its afterburners sending sparks of light dancing across the metal. She felt the vibration through her boots, but remained steady, her hands moving like clockwork. She remembered the first time she had set foot on a carrier deck, wide-eyed and filled with a mix of awe and fear. She had wanted to prove herself then, as she did now, but experience had tempered that raw energy into a focused, almost silent competence. Hours passed, yet no one seemed to notice her presence. Orders were barked, tasks were performed, jokes were shared, and yet she remained in the background, invisible, unacknowledged. That had always been the way she preferred it, quietly competent, unnoticed, and effective. It wasn't humility, it was survival. She knew better than anyone the cost of being noticed, of drawing attention to herself. But she also knew that the day might come when all that invisibility would change in an instant. And then she felt it. The shift in the air, the subtle pause in the rhythm of the crew's movements. Someone's gaze had found her, piercing through the ordinary, seeing something beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened, though her expression remained calm. She had been trained to handle the unexpected, yet even she could feel the gravity of that single moment. Something was about to break the silence, something that would shatter the careful balance of invisibility she had maintained for so long. She straightened, adjusting her gloves one last time, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. She was ready, as always, to face whatever came next. She had survived battles far deadlier than any missile she now handled, endured hardships that had left invisible scars on her body and soul, and yet she continued. She worked in silence, a ghost among the living, waiting for the moment when her past would finally demand recognition. Little did she know, that moment was closer than she thought. The sudden shift in the deck's atmosphere was unmistakable. One moment, the crew had been immersed in their routine, clanging tools, shouted commands, and the distant roar of jets, and the next, a stillness fell over the carrier like a tide frozen mid-surge, eyes turned. Conversations halted. The laughter of the morning seemed to evaporate, leaving only a thick, charged silence. It was the Admiral. He had been making his rounds, clipboard in hand, inspecting the deck crew with the practiced scrutiny of someone who had spent decades commanding men and machines alike. His boots clanged against the metal grating as he approached, each step deliberate, a rhythm that usually went unnoticed. Today, though, his eyes caught something that made him stop mid-stride, his pen suspended over the clipboard. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a flicker of movement, a shadow beneath the folds of the woman's uniform. But then the uniform shifted as she reached over the missile to check a bolt, revealing the scars carved across her back. Jagged, raw, and undeniable, a history written in flesh, a silent testament to battles fought long before this morning's routine. The Admiral froze. His mind raced, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew. He had seen soldiers wounded, men who had endured the horrors of war and returned bearing both pride and pain. But these scars, these were different. They spoke of clandestine missions, hidden battles, suffering endured alone, and courage beyond the measure of ordinary service. The sheer magnitude of her past, hidden in plain sight, hit him like a shock wave. Around them, the crew sensed the change. One by one, tools were lowered, eyes widening as whispers began to circulate. They didn't understand the significance, but they felt the tension, the sudden gravity of the moment. The woman remained unaware, focused on her task, oblivious to the silent storm building around her. She had mastered the art of invisibility, and yet the moment of revelation had arrived unbidden. The Admiral's voice broke the silence, though barely above a whisper. Who are you?" The question, so simple in words, carried a weight that could have cracked steel. Heads turned toward him, some curious, some uncertain. The woman paused, slowly straightening, finally aware of the attention she had drawn. Her eyes, steady and unwavering, met his. There was no fear, no hesitation, only the quiet strength of someone who had been tested beyond measure and emerged unbroken. "I'm no one," she said softly, almost reflexively. But even she could feel the inadequacy of the words. How could she explain the years of missions, the impossible situations, the scars that were both punishment and proof of survival, in a few quiet sentences? Words were insufficient. Her silence spoke louder than any introduction could. The Admiral stepped closer, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had thought himself prepared for anything, yet this revelation shook him. He had never expected that among the seemingly ordinary deck crew, someone had endured what she had, someone had survived battles that would have broken others, someone had carried the weight of classified missions hidden beneath the folds of a uniform. The crew watched in stunned silence as the woman adjusted her gloves and returned her attention to the missile as if nothing had happened. But the energy on the deck had changed irrevocably. Respect replaced indifference. Curiosity replaced ignorance. Fear of judgment replaced casual disregard. The woman had been invisible, unnoticed, until the Admiral's eyes revealed her truth to the world. A young sailor whispered to a colleague, voice barely audible, "Do you see those scars? She's been through hell." Another crew member nodded slowly, realization dawning. It wasn't just her physical presence that had gone unnoticed. It was her experience, her history, her very identity. And now, for the first time, the truth was visible to everyone who had passed her by without a second glance. The Admiral's mind raced with questions, each one more urgent than the last. Who had she served under? What missions had she completed? How had she survived the trials that these scars represented? But more than anything, he felt a deep, visceral respect, a recognition of courage and resilience that transcended rank or protocol. For the first time, the woman was no longer invisible. The deck, once a blur of motion and noise, had become a stage upon which her past and present converged. Every scar, every movement, every quiet act of competence spoke louder than any announcement could. She was not just a worker loading missiles. She was a survivor, a warrior, and a living testament to the harsh reality of the world she had mastered. The silence stretched thick with unspoken understanding. Then, finally, the Admiral exhaled, a mixture of relief and awe, and nodded slowly. It was a gesture that carried approval, respect, and the unspoken acknowledgement that everything he thought he knew about her, and perhaps about bravery itself, had just changed forever. The deck remained suspended in that moment of tension, as if the ocean itself had paused to watch. The crew had stopped, every pair of eyes fixed on her, on the silent testament of her past. The wind whipped across the carrier, tugging at her uniform, but she didn't flinch. She had survived far worse than a gust of sea air, far worse than the curious stares of men who had only just realized the truth standing in their midst. The Admiral took another step closer, his boots clanging against the deck with deliberate caution. His gaze was locked on the scars that etched a hidden history across her backs. Scars that spoke of battles that could not be named, missions that were never celebrated, pain that was endured alone. There was a quiet gravity to her posture, a calm strength that made his chest tighten with respect. He had met heroes before, but rarely one who carried both humility and an invisible war so seamlessly at once. Around them, whispers began to circulate, tentative at first, then louder, as the crew processed what they were seeing. One sailor muttered under his breath, She's a Navy SEAL, isn't she?" Another shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. The revelation spread quickly. Eyes that had once dismissed her now glimmered with awe, respect, and an almost reverent curiosity. She had always moved through their ranks unnoticed, performing her duties flawlessly, yet it took the Admiral's gaze to make her extraordinary past undeniable. She finally turned slightly, just enough for the scars to be fully visible, the jagged marks stretching across her shoulder blades and lower back, the evidence of missions that few could even imagine. She didn't hide them, she had never needed to. They were proof of survival, proof of resilience, proof of courage in the face of unimaginable odds, and in that instant, the invisible became undeniable. The Admiral exhaled slowly, trying to steady his racing thoughts. This was not a routine inspection anymore. This was a revelation that demanded acknowledgement, understanding, and respect. He had spent years commanding, assessing, and judging men and women by their performance, their ranks, their words, but this silent, stoic presence taught him a lesson far deeper. Heroism did not always come with announcements, medals, or recognition. Sometimes it came quietly, in the shadows, in scars that told stories no one would ask about. The woman met his gaze finally, eyes steady, unwavering, carrying a depth of experience that seemed to bridge decades in a single glance. "I'm not here to impress anyone," she said softly. Her voice was calm, composed, but there was a weight behind it that made the Admiral pause. She didn't need to prove herself. She never had. The truth of her history spoke louder than any words ever could. A young sailor, emboldened by the Admiral's silent approval, stepped closer. "Ma'am, we had no idea," he said, voice thick with awe. We didn't know who you really were." She offered a faint, knowing smile, almost imperceptible. "Most people don't. That's how it's always been." Her hands returned to the missile, tightening bolts with careful precision. A reminder that her skill and discipline were constants, no matter how the world perceived her. The Admiral approached even closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper that only she could hear. "I should have recognized you sooner," he said. "I should have seen what everyone else missed." There was a raw honesty in his tone, a humbling acknowledgement that some truths are invisible until someone finally looks. She didn't answer, not yet. Words weren't necessary. The respect had already been conveyed, the recognition already given. The crew's energy shifted subtly, the air now charged with quiet reverence. They moved around her more carefully, offering subtle nods of respect, a silent acknowledgement that the woman who had been invisible for so long was no longer just another face on the deck. She had survived, endured, and emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. She had carried her past silently, never asking for acknowledgement, and yet her story now resonated with everyone present. She stood there, alone in the midst of a bustling carrier deck, yet somehow utterly central to the world around her. The ocean stretched endlessly behind her, the rising sun painting the horizon with gold and fire. The wind tugged at her hair and uniform, but she remained steadfast, calm, and resolute. Every scar on her back, every twitch of her muscles, every line in her expression was a testament to battles fought, won, and survived. The Admiral finally stepped back, his respect no longer silent. "You've already outranked any assumption anyone could have made about you," he said aloud, voice carrying across the deck. His words were met with a ripple of acknowledgement from the crew. They now saw her not as a worker, not as invisible, but as a force forged in fire, someone whose courage, skill, and resilience transcended recognition or rank. And in that moment she smiled just faintly, a shadow of satisfaction. She had always known who she was, what she had endured, and what she had survived. The world had finally caught up. The invisible had been seen, the unacknowledged recognized, and the quiet hero finally claimed her place, not just on the deck, but in the minds and hearts of everyone who witnessed her story.